Good to go?
Yes.
Okay. Well, good afternoon. Great to see some of you again. A couple of new faces, but glad to see Camden is still really busy. Just walking on. It's
Couldn't find a parking spot.
I should say busier. So for those that you don't know me, I'm John Burke. I'm a parking and transit consultant here in New England. Been doing this a long time. Had been a parking director for 3 metropolitan areas prior to being a consultant the last 15 years in my own practice in Massachusetts. These are some of the clients that I have on the coast that we've done master planning efforts very similar to this one. The workshop agenda, Audrey was saying we really want to do an overview of the study for those who really weren't part of it or here are really tied into it. But we'll really focus on the recommended paid parking program. There's a lot of recommendations in there and relating to boat trailer parking or, RV or overnight. But I think here we want to just focus on the paid system. We'll talk a little bit about the recommended program, the paid parking pilot at the landing, and then revenue cost projections for potentially expanding that system. So we had a generic parking study in 21-22. I mean, this is sort of the 10 steps that we typically look at with some changes. It was sort of the tail end of COVID. And so, we did have some extra efforts to try to reach out. And we did that through stakeholder interviews, working with the advisory committee to find all users. So that would be residents, employees, business owners, or just folks that use the parking system. And we interviewed them and we also surveyed them. We had a couple of public informational meetings, one on September 21 and then a final one in January of 22. We looked at a 5-minute walk radius of the downtown. That's where the vast majority, 90+% of your parking sessions occur. And that's pretty consistent in small towns with free parking. So that's what we looked at, and that's what we ended up counting all the parking spaces in. That was our advisory committee at the time. A lot of folks that touch parking on a daily basis and others that are involved with it more on a policy basis. Again, back to our stakeholder interviews, tried to reach out and get as many diverse views as possible. And again, this is all, I think it's still online, isn't it, Audra? This whole, so you can still get into all of that. The public meeting number 1, we really didn't provide much but some preliminary data. And, we showed some, some of the mapping and whatnot, but really we got a lot of input from them, great insight, particularly for me, who was not as familiar here. And a lot had ideas for paid parking solutions, even though we weren't looking for those at the beginning of the study. You're always going to get them. And so we wrote down a good number of those, just listing a few there. All that information came back to the Parking Advisory Committee. The input, the stakeholder surveys, the stakeholder interviews, and then the public informational comments. And from there, they sort of developed these guiding principles that we were going to use throughout the study. Once we get to analysis and findings, we're going to look at how do we solve those findings. We're going to be looking at alternative recommendations. They all have to come back to the guiding principles, and they have to be consistent with them. And that's the premise we set in doing this. They made 15 of them, so we had a lot to go through, but that they're in priority order here, and you can again reference it later on the website. Counted all the parking downtown. I mean, with the exception of residential driveways and small parking lots, 10 and under, we pretty much captured everything, public and private, on street and off street. 2 good weather days in July, Thursday and a Saturday. Want to get a weekend condition, and that went very well. From there, we generated the occupancy rates, and what we found right out of the gate was there's a midday problem. So that 11:30 to 2 o'clock lunch time, which I just experienced out here again, and kind of went back and looked at some of these numbers. They look fairly consistent. Where the on-street space was at a premium, there really isn't that, we like to see 75 to 85% use in the peaks. It's when you're using your parking efficiently, not too much, but not leaving too much empty. You kind of want those 2 empty spaces or 1 or 2 empty spaces per block face so people can come in and not double park and wait for someone to pull out or worse. So we didn't find, here again on Thursday and Saturday, those are pretty high rates because that's the whole on-street system that was counted. Looks good otherwise. The overall system, 68%. You say, gee, this is the busiest hour, the busiest month, or the busiest time of the year, and you have 68% use of your total system. You would say, great. We look at that as parking plan and say, well, you probably don't need a parking deck or garage, but you do. We got to look at this closer because the overall off-street says 60%. How much of that is public? How much of that is private? And that was the next slide. We broke down the public and private off-street spaces and said, okay, this makes sense because this is what we were seeing. The off-street public was at a vast premium. There really was nothing there in those 2 counts, but off-street significantly underutilized. Under 50% at all time, the busiest time of the year. So, not unusual in a free parking environment, honestly, unfortunately, and we're dealing with this everywhere, USA. It's not just here. I mean, and I'm in Rockland, it's the same. That, we overbuilt for parking through many years of development. Traffic engineers got involved. I used to be one, and they, wanted so many spaces per this and that, and all of a sudden, we have what we have. So a lot of empty parkings, and that's key for us to look. We'll talk about this going forward. What we did is we mapped all of the hours of the day for both days. I won't go through this in high detail, but the red really shows that capacity condition. This is 9 in the morning on a Thursday. So you could see already public landing. We're like, wow, what's going on? And because, usually we do these studies at 9 a.m. Sometimes there's not even a parking problem. And a lot of the places like we go, we don't even start paid parking till 10, because, deliveries are still coming and whatnot. But here you can see you're already starting to load up. The employees are downtown. As you go through, I think I skipped one. Now you can see the on-street supply really kicking. I think there was something going on is that C Street? Is that what the one on the other side of the? Yeah, I think there was some event over there, but that typically wouldn't be that way. But other than that, it was pretty busy. And then 5 o'clock, you can see the on-street continues in certain areas to be problematic. Saturday, basically the same thing. Midday, on-street, same, right? And 5 p.m. So the other survey that was important for us was a license plate survey. We call it spot duration of stay. It essentially has us go out there and count, not every 2-hour space, but we focused on Main Street, Bayview Street, and public landing lot, 2-hour spaces that were in there then. And we found that 1 in 4 vehicles were parked in the 2-hour zone for more than the 2-hour time limit. Not a lot of citations on those windows, and I'm not sure there was any citations on those windows. So, enforcement wasn't there, but at the same point in time, we have, a lot of people staying a lot longer than we like. 1 in 3 in the public landing lot. That's extremely high. We usually see 5%, maybe 5 to 10%, that kind of range. 1 in 7 in the public landing lot parked over 4 hours, and that corresponded highly to when we talked to parking enforcement. They said, yeah, we think there's 30 or 40 employees in there moving their cars every 2 hours. And that corresponded well. Some of them probably aren't. And even if they were, we weren't always knowing if they moved them. We just get the license plate. So if they moved a space, we didn't pick up that they moved after 2 hours, but they're still an employee sitting in the lot taking a space. So that was the finding. Again, I won't go through all the findings because there's much. Try to focus on the ones with paid parking. But yeah, sufficient overall supply of parking downtown. There's things we need to look at from a management's perspective that could prevent building a deck. Nobody wants that. Everyone's trying to defer that, possibly eliminate that as an option, or other parking lots. But there's things we can look at first. Insufficient on-street 2-hour parking available weekdays and Saturdays. We mentioned that. And off-street is significantly underutilized. Public landing lot was by far the high demand lot. It was busy. I think it was effective capacity the entire day. That's crazy. I mean, the only lot with that kind of demand that I've is sort of is Mystic, Connecticut, where they have a similar lot, much bigger, but on the waterfront that has those types of characteristics as well. But it's $25 a day to park in that lot right now. So, but the 2-hour parking lots we identified, you know, off Washington and Mechanic, was saying they lend themselves more to infill than they do to parking, because they're all substandard aisle widths. They're not great for pedestrians, quite honestly, and even the backup space. So, you know, a lot of communities have a strategy to let's reduce these little lots we have downtown and see if we can replace them with something that's just a little bit further, you know, a couple of minutes maybe, you know, and put something there that people want to come to. I'm not putting off how important those lots are to the businesses. They certainly are, but they can be replaced. It's not always easy. Sometimes it doesn't even involve building anything. It might be a shared lot or something like that. So keep an eye on that. Public safety lot was also pretty well full, 8 to 4. I was just checking out now, completely full. And similarly, at the same time, Knowlton Street or Knox Mill lot was had plenty of availability at the same time. So the employees they want to get as close to the downtown. They're like everybody else. They want to get close, get here early, get close. And then if you have to, you know, go up the hill. So that's kind of the way it works. Library parking lot too, full lot, and full just now. You know, I use the back bay to turn around and get out. And I thought it would be an interesting study to see how much traffic is generated just by the library lot and coming and going from that curb cut. Not great for the pedestrian. And, you know, some communities go as far as to say, you know, put little sensors up there and say, lot full, don't pull in because you're just going to pull out. And we don't want that. So that's, you know, some do that. Some will just have permits and time limits. Again, off-street never got to 50%. There's some of the private lots, and you can see the amount of spaces that were open during the peak hour in the Congregational Church, the Camden, even in the Camden Company lot. And some pictures of that. And, you know, there's also we were pointing out at the time, several unregulated, underutilized residential streets within the 5-minute zone. So it'd still be a 5-minute walk that you can go out and park on all day. You know, I was just noticing Mountain Street was a little bit busier than I saw 3 years ago. So that, I don't know if that's something happening today or it's generally getting more parking up the hill. But I noticed that. But Pearl Street, just, you know, endless parking. Of course, it's residential, but it's really not that far. It seems far, but it's not, and so forth. So there is some availability there. So what do we got? We got turnover and adherence to limits is poor. For us on the parking planning side, parking meters are warranted. Doesn't mean you have to put them in, but they are warranted. Why are they warranted? They're warranted on extremely high occupancy rates or parking turnover. This is the trifecta. Poor adherence to posted time limits, those 3 things. And once you get those 3 things, we typically would recommend meters are self-enforcing. They will create that availability of parking on street. So the other ones really relate to outside of the paid system, but again, you can refer to the report. And this is sort of the implementation of the seasonal program downtown, you know, that as we actively saw it and showed it. We'll show a graphic of this in a minute. I mean, before I get into recommendations, though, maybe I'll stop there and just see, are there any, going through here, data collection, analysis and finding, are there any questions that you guys have related to that? Yes.
Did you look at parking lots that might be associated with businesses that aren't open anymore, or like there are a few on Elm Street and maybe some less obvious parking lots? And then also I was wondering about, did you look at like striping parking on Elm Street? So like stop and go to Rennie's?
No, we did not go that far out. We started basically at what's the cross with Pearl Street? The street coming across is
Free Street.
Yes, and that was sort of where the line spaces started. So on that end, that's where we kind of started.
In terms of being like 5 minutes from the downtown.
Yeah.
Like Pearl Street runs
Yeah.
parallel to Elm Street all the way.
Yeah, we went Pearl Street till the line of the circumference, but there was nobody parked on Pearl Street. So it was, we looked down, there'd be one car out of 30 spaces. Maybe, sometimes it was nothing. So at the time.
I was just wondering why you didn't point out like Elm Street potentially using that differently.
Which Elm Street?
So that's Main Street. Basically,
Yeah.
our Route 1 is called like 5 different things.
No, yeah, I
High
know
Street, Main Street. Elm Street is the part between Rennie.
coming into town.
I don't know where Elm Street. I think we're on.
This
Does it
building's
start
on it.
Okay, so I
Yeah.
guess I would mean like the part that's not straight. We treat part of that as like there's parking everywhere, and it feels like very downtownish.
Yeah.
And then you get to Stop and Go, and there's
Well, it's an
it's still
excellent.
very, very close.
It's an
but
excellent point. It's an excellent point, and we didn't see a whole lot of parking, but yeah, I mean,
No, there isn't any. But I don't know.
okay, and I don't know if it's allowed or not, but that that if it
So
is,
you only looked at places where parking is currently like happening a little bit, or
no, we pretty much did the 5 minute. Like we went into the neighborhood and we looked into down Union Street, went by the church and all down there. But when you
Mountain Street a little bit too.
yeah, mountain to the edges, we went to the edges everywhere. But when parking ran out, and maybe that was a shortcoming that we could have looked a little further down Elm, because I
People
don't know what the
don't do
ordinance
it,
says
but-
about that. Is it allowed park on street?
There are some areas where it's not striped, but it's in the downtown master plan to add parking. I do
Yeah.
think you mentioned some of them, like Wood
Yeah.
Street and
Yes.
Belmont, like part of Belmont.
that's
Yes.
still so far down though.
Yeah.
You're talking from Stop and Go up. from
Yeah, I'm just
south.
kind of wondering why if there's an opportunity there.
Well,
If that's a strange thing that we treat it more like it's like, okay, now you got to Stop and Go. Now it's a highway.
No,
And-
it's a great comment, and it's still there, and it's still an opportunity. I mean, I think that's the point, is that when you go out on these, I call them limited arterial, they're probably collector roads. You have parking pretty much on all of them if you go far enough out, even out at Chestnut, but you got to go ways.
Oh, yeah.
But it might be 5 minutes to the restaurant on Chestnut, the one down by Fry. And so, yeah, that's sort of the point we're making. It doesn't change anything here, but you're absolutely right. That's a great opportunity to go further out.
I think as you're going up Elm towards Stop and Go, it gets fairly narrow there.
Does, yeah.
And if you're in a truck trying to park on those spaces, you definitely have to bring in your windshield or your side mirrors.
Gotcha.
And I do know that tractor trailers have a tough time navigating through that little stretch.
That's
coming
down
through
at the
town.
bottom, but up the
Right.
top,
And
it's
I just
like,
don't, I don't know the
I think it's too
geometry
fast.
of
I
the
think
road.
that's, people don't, because it's too fast and it's,
And our bikes, are there shared bike markings there, or what's the bike?
we don't
Crossing.
even really have sidewalks.
Not on
there
that
that
one.
are
Not on
functional.
that one.
So
Okay.
it's-
Um,
It would
But-
probably require a total redesign to even have it, I guess, maybe to,
Yeah.
we don't need to
What was
dwell
it,
on
like
that.
Private lots, was it like 10 spaces and over?
10 spaces. So some of the ones on Elm Street coming in town, might have been under that threshold to count. A
'Cause
little,
there's that
the-
massive one on Elm Street that's some business that's not open anymore.
Oh,
By,
yeah. Across from the Rennies. you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, it
shockingly,
Actually has a big parking lot back there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really big.
But again, and this is an interesting thing, that when we're in a free environment, those distances, well, you say are very short. When we do our surveys on street, very few parkers will do it. Sometimes you can coax the employee to do it, but it's very difficult to do without taking something away. And
Oh, yeah.
you see how effective Public Landing was at moving employees. It's the pricing. It's very difficult to get that kind of walk in a free environment. Now, if that was, like I said, in my Haverhill, my other client, or Worcester, my other client, that would be the shortest walk you're ever going to find right? Because it's $2 an hour and up. So all of a sudden people start looking at those spaces. Hey, maybe I could go, your point is good. This is the supply we want to focus on within the context of paid parking. Sorry, I didn't want to jump before. Is there any other questions on data collection and analysis? Okay. So yeah, seasonal paid parking is the forerunner for the rest of the system, the rest of the program recommendations. And here, we say meter basically the 2-hour parking zones. Keep the first 15 to 20 minutes free. That was something the advisory committee was interested in. Some communities put a free 20-minute space on every block. or in the lot. Rockland's kind of discussing that. Okay, so maybe a little different. They're making everything first 15 to 20 minutes at the meter. So it's just a policy decision. Deep discounts to the permits to the employees in the long-term parking lots, spaces just outside the commercial retail district. Expand free and permit parking to employees and other user groups in a short walk of downtown. Protect residential neighborhoods from excessive downtown parking infiltration. So you got to be ready to expand resident parking potentially. It's a last resort. It doesn't typically always happen, but you want to keep an eye on residential spillover. Actively manage commercial loading. Well, we talked about those things. And there would be a need to add CSOs because you're going to have a much bigger system, and to cover all the hours, you would need that part-time.
Hold on, protect, can you go back to the, one of the recommendations was protect neighborhoods from what? From parking?
Spillover.
Whoop.
From somebody parking
Like
in front of your house?
on Pearl Street, like people start going down Pearl Street to walk into town or parking up on Cross Street. That's kind of, I don't see it as an issue,
I
frankly.
mean,
The
I'm
bigger-
sure the Chestnut Street people, they've been trying to protect themselves from this for a long time, but
And so around residential permit parking, and that's what we were kind of
for
discussing.
residential permit parking.
When we're not saying that here,
Oh.
but that is one mechanism to do it. Another is to say, hey, I don't have a driveway, and I live in a 2-hour time limited zone. Let's say out at Chestnut Street, for instance, and I can't get any of my people want to come and visit me, and there's no place to park on the street.
Oh,
In those cases, we sometimes issue permits to those residents in other communities, and they can park longer than that 2-hour limit. Now, there may be a host of things that they have to meet. I have no driveway, I have no off-street parking, and then they get a permit to do that.
Did the
otherwise they-
advisory committee think that this was an issue for us, or they were, no? Did they-
Well, no, I don't, but one of the things we're trying to do with paid parking systems is think ahead. Once you start charging, a lot of stuff happens. So when the public landing lot, you started charging, people went all over the place. The employees went out, the customers came in, the utilization didn't change. But people go places, and so you have to anticipate where are they going, and do I have space for them?
Mhm.
And what if it's in front of somebody's house and there's no other parking on the street? They're going to come to City Hall. So we're trying to think about that,
Mhm.
in
I
advance.
think there was talk about Chestnut Street. A little-
Yes,
Yeah. A little
definitely.
bit of talk about Chestnut.
Definitely. And we'll get back. That's coming up anyway. So this is where we would essentially be metering. Why would we do the metering? These are the things that metering will do for you. There are other things people will feel like, well, we're less friendly, we're this, that, and there's promotions you can do to help your user groups deal with that. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But here's what it does for you from the planning perspective. Improves parking availability, turnover, and visitor customer satisfaction. You get that turnover, it should show itself at the register. I'm sure the public landing lot's getting a lot more customers there than they were before. We haven't done an economic study of that. It would be interesting to do. The visitors aren't, the increased economic activity, the employees move out of those spaces. They free it up for maybe one employee could free up 4 customers, So many more users. We increase the use of private parking facilities. So why is that? A lot of parking facilities privately, when we go to paid parking, we see those use rates go way up. Because the employees used to park in the public, why wouldn't they park on the public side? It's free. Leave my lot open for my customers, put the employees on the street. Well, put them somewhere else. But we almost universally see private lots go up with paid parking. And this is the issue here. You've got a lot of pavement at the busiest hour of the busiest day of the year in this downtown, a lot. And it's empty. And it's adding to your heat island and those types of things. So how do we use it? This is really the thing. How do you better use it? Paid parking is one way. Shared lot agreements is another way. Acquisitions when you can do it. But cities, this is what we grapple with in every town. Like, how do we get this private space getting used? There's no economic incentive either for those owners to do anything with the town. There's no revenue on this side. There's no parking revenue to say, hey, could we share your lot? Could we lease your lot? There's no revenue. How do we do that? So it does a lot for getting the use of those spaces. Makes things possible. And there's some other reasons for doing it, reducing parking citations, reducing traffic, which is a biggie. Talked about the library lot, but essentially today, I go down Elm Street, I go down Main Street, there's not a single space. And off I went to Never Never Land to try to get back. It's tough and a long line to get back. So if we can create that 1 or 2 spaces at each block face, and we can reliably provide that, you're going to reduce all that hunting and circling, which can be 20 to 30% of your traffic in some cases. So create a revenue source to better manage and reinvest in downtown. Some of my clients have built transit systems with this money, City of Portsmouth. Some have built parking decks, City of Newburyport, Town of Plymouth. Some put it into their sidewalks and lighting. So, but it creates that source to be able to address some of your parking and traffic issues. Really important. So any questions on implementation?
A couple things, if I can. This is Chris. I'm online. Maybe you can hear me. I meant to ask during the first interruption, but I wasn't quick enough on the mute button, so sorry about that. Just refresh me again, was this testing of parking lot spacing the count? Was the count of spaces done prior to the bump out work or after the bump out work?
Do you remember?
It was after.
Was it after?
Yeah.
Sounds like
After.
after. Sounds like after.
After.
Okay, good. And was the testing, like you did the testing, a comparison of Mountain Street, was that during COVID periods in 2021?
I think we were still dealing with it because I remember wearing a mask at one of the meetings. So I would say so.
Does it warrant doing a more current study with regular traffic now at this point before doing anything further? Because of the data may be a little bit slighted because of the COVID experience?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think the generic, the overall, from what I can see driving around town today, I don't think the overall recommendations would change. But I think you're right about the program in terms of regulations. There might be some minor tweaks to places that we, would want to look at again. But yeah, I'm seeing more use. It's anecdotal. I'm seeing one day at midday. But it does seem to be a little bit busier than when we did it. And it was busy when we did it. So it's a good point you're making. And I think some limited survey wouldn't be bad to do it, particularly at the outskirts where it's growing. The parking's probably growing.
Yeah, I just think it would be better on the acceptance of people, because otherwise they would, maybe jump to that little hole. But hey, you tested the parking thing during COVID and that was really different and we know it was different, so why use that? So I would think some sort of an adjustment would be better. You mentioned about, sometimes you need to promote these things that they're good as compared to say, this is what it is. But you recognize the marketing issues that may happen in the discomfort people might have if the data points were collected during a period of known oddness.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it wouldn't take much time at all to do a quick verification of account. I think what you're going to find is its worst case scenario in terms of demand has increased out there from what I can see. It's not the best day. It's not a bad day, but it's certainly not the sunny days we had in July. But that said, I think it's never it doesn't take any time at all to do it, an afternoon or a day, and then just say, hey, we've confirmed it. If that makes folks feel better about the recommendations, it's always a good thing. Sure.
I think it would.
Yeah.
To take it. Yeah. So that excuse is removed.
Sure. For sure. Yeah.
That's just my opinion.
That's a good comment. Thank you.
Chris, do you think that overall people are thinking we don't really have a parking issue or a parking availability issue during those times? That was just COVID data? Because I noticed you're doing this from home, but I personally drove around the block 3 times looking for a parking spot that I probably shouldn't have parked in anyway.
Yeah, probably August is our busiest month, So it wouldn't be surprising. I mean, I heard from my friends. Yeah, I don't get out of the. I'm actually under house arrest. I'm just kidding, but I don't get out. I don't get out of here very often. But from what I do hear is that August is really busy, and I do live north of town, kind of a bit north of Audra, but we do get the same effect. There's probably the biggest delay that probably she and I receive are trying to get into town, depending on where traffic is back up to. But usually, yeah, during the busy times, it's more difficult to find spaces. But I'm also interested in hearing about why other towns have decided to change, like Old Orchard, to remove some of the paid parking because of the negative impact that they perceived, at least, on the businesses at the time. And maybe that'll be addressed later in this. I know Haverhill is one of the places that I also worked at a bank, and I prefer to live in Camden than I do in Haverhill.
Well, that I was going to say about Old Orchard. I've got other. I've got demand statistics on most of the coastal communities. I showed some of them earlier today because I've counted them over the last 20 years. You guys are more in the demand categories of Mystic, Plymouth, Mass, Portsmouth, New Hampshire. You've got a very high occupancy. It's not Old Orchard. I can tell you.
What's different about it? What's Old Orchard? I don't go there much. Like,
outside of the beach area, the demand, I'm not sure that you guys are fairly unrivaled. Bar Harbor is my client as well. They may beat you in terms of overall demand, but not many more do. You've got a real, just to give you my perspective, because I'm in these communities pretty regularly for work. And this is a different level of demand here than
Old Orchard.
in my opinion.
Old
Yes,
Orchard has like a lot of like private paid parking too.
they have a lot. That's
Like
right.
a lot of it.
And that's a really good point. That's one that was up here. What you have here structurally is you don't have lots on the outskirts. So some of these communities have it, and boy, what are we really trying to do here? That giant line that goes all the way down, and then coming in from the other direction, C Street, when you get out, we want to reduce that. We want to get people into their parking space as quick as possible. So it'd be great if you had, let's say the Congregational Church was yours, or even further out. You could get them right in, right? Wouldn't that be awesome? And then you don't need to draw people down here. You're always going to have the public landing. But some other communities are just fortunate to structurally be set up a little differently. There's pluses and minuses. You're close to the action, but it does draw a lot of traffic. Parking does. That's what that's the nature of it.
Wasn't there like something we had talked about too that had shown like the increase in people visiting the different establishments and the increase in revenue that's generated from that because it's easier to park? Wasn't there some component to that?
I'm glad you remembered that 3
Yeah.
years later. That's pretty good.
Um,
Because that's exactly right. It's the walk
Harbor
distance.
said the same thing too. He goes, that's what they had found.
Yeah, I think it was like retail and restaurants.
Yes.
Went up instead of down.
Yes.
Everyone was afraid they were going to decrease because of
Yes.
paid parking, but they actually increased.
That's exactly right. And I was doing the study during COVID in Mystic. I did their massive, and with the retailers, their walk traffic was up. It was as some of the highest walk in that they had during COVID. But that doesn't. I think the point is still good. It's still different now. So, and people will say, "Hey, that was COVID." The other point, to Dave's point, I think is that walk distances are really important for an employee. And you do these surveys in a paid environment, they're willing to walk 1,000 feet to a parking space. That's pretty, several blocks. The retail customer, it's typically a couple hundred feet. And so when they go by and there's no availability on the street, they may just keep going. We never know what the latent loss of business is, but you do lose business. Not everybody circles back. Not everybody goes to the place they wanted to go because they're now, so those walk distances of user groups, really important to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I know when I was talking with some folks down at one of the restaurants, it was last summer, they actually left Bar Harbor and came to Camden and stayed in Camden instead of Bar Harbor because of the availability of free parking.
Yeah. And to be fair with Bar Harbor, they have free parking there as well. It may be a little bit more of a walk, but they, than some of the places we're talking about right at the 5 minute, but they have a fairly good supply as you get just outside of that single metered area.
Evidently, they didn't find it. But the other thing that we also deal with too, and I don't know how we compare to Mystic, Connecticut, but the age of our population, is it older that we get for people dropping in, or is it just a total mix? I don't know.
It's a total mix.
I think it's a mix. Yeah. That I don't know. But
I was just thinking of that in regards to walkability.
right. Very important. Yeah. And again, once again, another reason to have that kind of availability, or even a free 20-minute space for someone to walk in. But yeah, I mean, these are all policy decisions and discussions and important stuff. Let me just continue with the implementation though. What are some of the things that we can do to make it easier for the customer? And these are some of the things: free 15 to 20-minute parking at every space. Let them pay in any way, text to pay, using their phone, using a credit card, using whatever means necessary. And then allow customers to pay for and extend parking sessions remotely, which is you guys have already started. Merchant validations are very popular with paid parking because you give the merchant the opportunity to just validate their customers' parking. Sometimes the town will kick in one of the 50%, the merchant pays the other 50%. They can do it from a laptop. They get a monthly bill from the town. It's all very well audited. And that's the technology you have currently. You're able to do this kind of thing. So we say allow employee permit parking. This is something that the committee talked about, because if the permits are allowed for employees in the public safety lot, and now we're saying you can go up the street to Knox Mill if you don't want it. You don't have to, giving people options on price points, right? Everyone has a free option. So the employee can go up the hill and pay nothing, right? But if the public safety lot's full, they could have spillover. Spillover could be the free lot, but they could also go into one of the 3-hour zones that are listed there. Chestnut Mountain or Fry, potentially. Continuing, so we talk about permits, we talk about day trippers, use of space permits. And again, we've already covered this, increasing the use of privately owned parking spaces and what paid parking will do for that. So this is really what we saw as our program, in terms of the meters. Red is your meter zone, right? And then blue would be I believe some of the 3-hour zone, or maybe is it black? Black's free all day parking is black. No, free 3-hour public parking is black. Blue is free all day parking. And, so this is the system. You've got your employees in the public safety lot. They have other options on street. They have the Knox Mill lot as an option as well. We're showing 4-hour parking in these lots. A lot of my clients are removing all time limits in lots. And their thinking is this: you might not do it for public landing, but the other ones you might think about it, because what we're saying is we're worried about an employee staying all day, right? And taking 4 customer spaces or more, because that would be used 4 or 5 times. If an employee wants to pay $16 to park all day in one of those lots, how many are really going to be willing to do that? Now, there are parts of Portsmouth where we had lots of employees willing to pay that because their pricing was higher. So we did have time limits, but probably it would be a very small number. So you have the option of eliminating time limits in the lots. All right, let's move on to the public landing lot and the pilot program that occurred there. You're all familiar with it. I'm sure everybody's parked there. We have the 2 solar-powered credit card-enabled kiosks there in pay-by-plate format with QR code option. I think last I checked with Jody Hansen, it was 1 out of 4 people were paying, maybe, with Jody. Sorry, I haven't met you in person. It's me. 1 in 4 parkers, I believe, were paying 24% with the app. So that's what I recall, which is pretty good. You know, that's a really good start to get 24% payments. And we would like to see that get up to 50%. And I think you will get up to 50%. People will stop, you know, the easier it is to use. Seasonal's paid parking in the lot is $2 an hour. I think we went from 3 hours. I think we actually went to 4, didn't we? 4 hours, 4-hour time limits in the lot. We might have started at 3 and it went to 4, but at any rate, check those signs. 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., 7 days a week, holidays included, May to October. So yeah, you've got a very sophisticated cloud-based system to operate this with the enforcement, everything by license plate. It all can be run by at a single laptop. I have Bar Harbor for a long time was run at a single laptop, the entire downtown. That's enforcement, that's paid parking, that's permits, everything from a single laptop. I don't know if they still are. They may have had to branch out, but that's pretty amazing because it's a big operation. It's quite a business. You know, you have $3 or $4 million a year in revenue there. So, I think I skipped one, didn't I? So since the pilot program began August 5th, the town's collected $168,000. That's 2 partial seasons and 1 full season. The 1 full in 2023 is $90,000. The equipment was about $25,000, capital purchase installation, and the ongoing operating costs are around $15,000. I think you paid off the equipment and installation in like 2 months, which was a pretty good payback on that. And, you know, so going forward, it looks like your net operating income is about $75,000 a season. It'd be seasonal. So we were worried the committee was, you know, it's going to change utilization. There'll be empty spaces. Yeah, we didn't see any of that. It was full today. Just coming here at 12, whatever it was, 12:30. So yeah, we didn't see a change in utilization. We saw a change of who was in there. No more space shuffling, a lot more turnover, and from enforcement at the time, much less need for enforce. Still have to do expired meter checks, but time limit checks is the big time labor issue. It takes a lot of time for people. So the recommended seasonal paid parking program, those are the primary elements. I'm not going to go through them again. And, you know, here the benefits, I think we've covered all the benefits. Yeah, I think we have. And here's, so I'll stop there. Any questions before we get into the revenue cost projections? This is the end of the last module.
What projections do you do as far as impact on the business, impact on the kind of the view? And you did mention the friendliness thing. I am one who does, I'm not a fan of paid parking because of the friendliness appearance, the, you know, ability to go downtown. And you know, I don't even go down to the public landing myself, you know, where I maybe used to have lunch, you know, even though it's on a motorcycle typically.
Yep.
Yep. I'm one of those that my traffic has decreased just because of that. So in your analysis, where do you put that? You know, Camden was voted one of the 10 prettiest towns in the country, or #1 for a number of years. When I go down to the parking lot and the parking signs block my view, that's not really fun either.
Yeah, I mean, it's a trade-off, and you know, that's the thing is what are you gaining? Sometimes we'll just focus on what we're losing, but the issue is, you know, when we look at availability and someone just getting in here, pedestrian accessibility, pedestrian traffic in general. These are things that you guys have said are a priority, and we're kind of sort of looking at. That said, give me a slide or two, because we're going to talk about promotions and what can be done for different user groups. So I've got a slide for you. It's coming up. There's only a few left here, so bear with me. So the assumed
Okay. Well, thank you for handling my questions, by the way.
Yep, no worries. I'll be right back to you. So on the assumed paid parking program parameters, because we're doing this revenue forecast before we're doing paid parking, we had to make some assumptions about pricing and things of that nature. And we worked a little bit with the town, gleaned a little from the previous committee, and this is kind of what we assumed. We built a model to do the revenue and cost forecast. This model can be used with any assumptions. You want to give free, you know, a discounted parking to the Camden resident at every meter, we can put that in the mall, right? You want to waive, reduce the cost of the permit for the employee, we can do that. So we had to have a starting point, and this is our starting point, okay? Seasonal metered parking, 9 to 6, 7 days a week, holidays, June 1st to October 15th. We heard there was a little slack demand at Public Landing the last 2 weeks of October and maybe before Memorial Day. So I think a pretty good case could be made that this should be May 15 to October 15 but again, we had to use a starting point, so we use this, right? And these decisions would be made with data. We would bring that data back to the policy and say, hey, here's what it is. You pick the days. All right. Meter rate, $2. Employee permit, $30 a month. I think Rockland's custom house lot is $40 a month. So we have $30. All right. So we have $30, $100 a season. Again, could be more or less. Resident permit fees are usually a nominal fee, usually to cover that administrative cost. It certainly doesn't cover enforcement costs, but $30 a season, we see that. It could be 50, it could be 20, we see that. Expired meter and overtime parking citation fine of $30. Streets, we say 3-hour time limit. We're seeing that movement. The committee like that, like the 2 hours seems a little confining. If you want to have lunch and do something else, let's go to 3. They also said the same thing about, the lots. Let's go to 4. Again, I'm saying to you, if you go to paid parking, these could just be, get rid of those time limits altogether. Right? And then look at the data. If you have a problem with employees still paying that $16, my guess is it's not going to be that big an issue, with maybe the exception of the Public Landing lot. Okay, let me just go back to that for a second. Okay, no, I'll come back. Non-metered streets with 3-hour time limits listed there. Okay, so employee resident permit holders could be exempt there. And that depends on how much they're being used, but absolutely that's something that's done in plenty of places. Okay, so they're exempt from having to move their car every 3 hours. It's a decision that has to be made. So our strategies to increase customer satisfaction and convenience, and this is the slide getting back to the question, Chris, that first 15-minute free at all spaces. I still want to run in the store. Don't let this stop me. We want 15 at every, so you don't have to pay for the first 15 minutes. Okay, that allows that regular jump in, jump out. Again, alternatively, you create an individual space with no meter, and City of Worcester does that. It's very common. Rockland's talking about it, so that everybody knows they can run in and out. Okay. All existing posted spaces would remain free, so 15-30 loading zones. First expired meter overtime parking citation received by Camden residents each year would be waived. Not cheap, there's a lot of revenue, but at the same point in time, that was one of the things that came out was of interest, out of the process. Merchant loyalty program we covered. Text to pay, there's QR to pay. I'm not sure you have text to pay yet, but QR to pay on your phone, you have to sign up and become a member of Park Smarter, and then you never sign up again. You just put in your license plate and you go. It's pretty convenient. Text to pay is more for the first time user. They can simply put in the text on the line. It will send them to a site and they just put in their credit card. They don't have to become a member. They don't have to have another app on their phone, right? So that's if you have a lot of one-time people, you do both a lot of times. So that's one we would look at. Ability to extend parking sessions remotely, incredibly popular thing. Just because you're sitting in the restaurant, you realize you don't leave the restaurant, you're still eating and you just add time. It's that simple from your phone. And you get a receipt. Free parking option in the Knox Mill lot. Again, we want free. We still want free, and we want free even within the 5-minute zone. That's pretty good, and not every city has free in the 5-minute zone. We didn't include a discount to Camden residents at the meter because we did not survey, and when our license plate survey, we didn't go to the registry and find out how many people were Camden residents. So there was no way for us to quantify what that would cost you in terms of a promotion. So we didn't model it, but it certainly could be modeled. And there's others, and every community has different discounts for different user groups. It's town by town, city by city. So our projections based on those parameters in that time frame is this, $600,000+ on projections. Seasonal parking revenue. This doesn't include all parking citations. It's just meter and overtime. Because that would be new. Meter citations would be new. You can see permit revenue is almost nothing. And this is true everywhere. Permit is the giveaway so that you can move an employee somewhere, maybe outside the demand center. It's still a reasonable walk. We want reasonable walks. But that's kind of the giveaway to make sure. So I show it as a $6,000 cost, but it actually creates more revenue and turnover for the businesses by freeing up spaces closer in that are much more higher demand. And then, our projected capital operating costs, 40 plus or minus kiosks. Each kiosk would handle on street maybe 8 to 12 parking spaces, something like that. In a lot, it can handle 50 parking spaces, so they're much more economical, right? So you'd have that one-time purchase. You've got operational fees to the vendor, credit card transactional fees, all of the rest. And then enforcement staffing, we're looking at 2 part-time seasonal. We said $20 an hour. It might be more than that, it sounds like. Not easy to hire part-time seasonal, but that would be needed to get that, to have a single person on the street, all hours of paid parking. That would be the goal. So first year net operating income, 150, you pay off that capital cost. And then, second year, again, assuming everything is the same, you're just down to your operational costs, your supplies, your enforcement staffing, and, a $500,000 projected operating income. So you're not at the 3 million, 2 to 3 million up in Bar Harbor, but it's a bigger system. There's a lot more going on there. The rates we use, your occupancy levels to some of the other coastal communities that closely match your occupancy levels, this would be sort of in that range per space range if you divided that by all your spaces. So that's where we're at. And, I threw a lot of information at you and apologize for that. I should have had more separations for discussion, but I guess, Audra, that would be it. I don't know if we want to have any more questions or discussion about any individual items. I'd be glad to answer anything I can.
I have a question. Do municipalities limit the number of permits that they would give to residents or employees in order to keep those spaces more fluid for transient visitors?
Yes, it's an excellent question. And so, this is, you can do whole economic, you can get a degree in just on parking, because really it's a pricing problem, right? It's supply and demand.
Yeah.
And so unlike a business, communities will set pricing not necessarily on market rates, but on what they believe is appropriate, and maybe matching a nearby town or what my employee can afford. And so ultimately what happens is those permits sometimes get sold at a very low number, and you find way more people buying those permits. So that's why I want to make sure we have a free spillover area that's close to public landing, so they don't have to go far. If they get there late in the day and there's nothing there. As far as the transient and the other customers, you're absolutely right. You have to keep an eye on those numbers. The choices are go up in the rate. For instance, sometimes communities will sell resident permits, let's say, and they don't realize now, since COVID, a lot more people are at home.
Right.
And so they get inundated by those resident permits. And then they realize, oh, some of those apartments have 3 cars and they're $5 a year or $25 a year, right? So those lots get overwhelmed. So they have to really think about the pricing on that realm in terms of what they're going to do so you don't overwhelm the system. And we did think about that here. It's not to say you don't get the data back and say, you know what, I think we're squeezing some people, a user group out of this lot. We got to raise the price a little bit. Maybe we raise the price on second and third cars. If you're going to store your car in the downtown for 24/7, that comes at for nothing. So maybe the second and the third car, you pay. But there's all kinds of options for pricing that does that kind of thing. And those are the discussions usually the parking committee wrestles with after seeing the data.
Mhm.
It's a really good point. Yes.
From a friendliness perspective, I feel like at one point I saw data, I can't remember if it was your presentation or somebody else's presentation, but it was looking at kind of the number of people that, because of the current parking problem that we have at certain times, might be just bypassing Camden altogether or I know my dad says that he does not come down here in the summer, for instance. And then I read the comments on a few Bangor Daily News articles about parking in Camden, not like from Camden residents mostly, but just people around the state, and seeing this vitriol about how people are never going to stop in Camden because it's impossible to find a parking spot. And that was interesting to me because I usually succeed at finding a parking spot, but I think a lot of people don't.
Yeah.
Do you have any kind of data on sort of the
Yeah.
missed opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, there's been studies done on it. I have not done it on that latent loss of, what we can't see for lost business. We know it's there, because we hear it in surveys, but it hasn't been quantified. It's can be considerable. One of the things we try to do though, and that's why I push this merchant loyalty. I think it's the greatest thing because, you still want your regulars coming. I mean, the people who are coming to Camden obviously are coming no matter what, and they're going to drive around until they find something. You're not going to lose too many people permanently. An individual business might lose somebody because he might go to a different restaurant, but because there's no availability here. But they're here, right? But your regular customers, and dealing with this in Rockland too, a couple of businesses downtown that has, I think, more regulars than tourists, right? So they rely on that. So a merchant loyalty does that for them. You come down and you won't pay for parking. We're going to validate your parking. And I just find that as a great way, not for everyone. And again, every visitor and tourist, you expect to pay something. You come to Camden, you're expecting to pay. I can guarantee you, most people from away are expecting to pay. And it's great they find that they don't until they can't find a parking space. So I don't know if I really answered your question in a roundabout way, but I think I do want to focus on that regular customer. I do think they are super important. And your point about you don't know what you're losing is a good
A lot
one.
of people don't come down at all because they know what they're going to face.
Yeah.
And where does that, I think I saw the target rate is 70% occupancy or something
For
that you'd want to see. You gave the numbers for where we were.
75 to 85 is it's what we're all shooting for. 75 to 85%, perfect efficiency, gives one space, two spaces per block face. And then you have, 10% availability or more in the lots.
And that must be based on something, the idea that you need to have a certain number of open spots for people to use them. Or
Exactly. It's to make sure that there's always one or two spaces as you're driving down each block face. But does any community get exactly 75 to 85 in all the facilities? No, but that they work really hard at it, and they change their pricing to get it because you want to efficiently use all your assets. In here with a free environment, there's all this free, you mentioned some of it, there's a lot of free pavement out there. There's a lot of free private pavement, unfortunately, but there's also a lot within a walking distance. But no one's going to do it
right.
without pricing. I've not seen a community be successful by just writing tickets infinitum downtown. There have been some that tried. So they just hire a whole army of enforcement officers, and every 2 hours they write tickets. But people still shuffle, and there is something to the meter, I'm afraid. So.
And I guess that's feedback that we've gotten in terms of the friendliness factor.
Well,
that
right.
If we're really managing our parking system, it means, and it's free, it means we're writing a lot more tickets, and that makes people a lot
No.
angrier than paying upfront for parking.
Yes, and particularly to your point of like the visitor tourists, they expect to pay, and they're happy to pay. They want to have some convenience with that, of course. So so then the towns usually focus on all the other users. Well, what can we do for our regular customer from Camden who I rely? There's something we can do for them. There's something that you can do discounts for different user groups. But yeah, that's it in a nutshell. I mean, you have to
I
decide.
think Randy, when we made a push a couple of years ago to really up the enforcement, that was sort of the feedback that we got, that it was very unfriendly to be so aggressively enforcing our rules.
For the unsatisfied customers that he ends up giving tickets every day.
It's so interesting. It's so interesting that that's always the argument for a user-based system, right? Like, oh yeah, we got to enforce it. And that's the other side of the argument. But then when you actually do it, then everybody's really unhappy.
That's right.
It's like we know we want you to enforce it, but we don't want you to enforce it. That's really the argument. And if you are going to enforce it, there's going to be people that are going to be unhappy with a pay-as-you-throw system, no matter like for waste, for parking, for speeding. It's always the same thing. You always have to construct the system to be able to just enable it to work on its own without a lot of enforcement, or it won't work.
Right.
That's really the problem.
Absolutely right.
So.
Just wanted to circle back to what you said earlier, and I think is a big part of the reason why some people may not want to come to Camden in the summertime. May not really be about the availability of parking, but it's actually the traffic coming into Camden. And once you're in Camden, traffic is so jammed up. And I think what you said, just focusing on that, it's the people that are continually looking for that parking spot, so they're in this forever circle in and around downtown here constantly. And if those spaces were opened up and they were available, more spaces, they wouldn't be on that forever.
Well, that's right. And by the way, they're the worst of the traffic because they're distracted often. They're often looking for the space and they're not seeing you have a lot of crossings, a lot of pedestrians. So it's a double whammy with people searching for parking. They're hunting, and they might have a reservation, and they're moving quickly.
I just
Do
think
you
it's
have a percentage number for that that I saw somewhere? That up to 30, was it 30% they
We've
thought?
seen studies as high as 30. I tend to doubt it's that high.
Just give up
Like
and-
the percentage
that are
of people that are
circling.
driving
Yeah.
around, like how many of those people are just looking for a parking spot rather than?
20 to 30% of our downtown
Yeah,
traffic.
yeah. I mentioned just like in the library lot, it's just amazing to watch the people go. And that's just one little lot where people are just doing the little circling out, in and out, in and out. There's nobody. We put a little down, like I say, a little electric sign at the bottom saying full. Might solve that. It's not a big enough lot probably to do that, to make it worth it. But, if you add all of that up, compound it over all these other facilities, I went through all the facilities, and like I said, the public safety lot was full. There was only motorcycle spaces, handicap spaces, and public landing. So I'm driving through like everybody else, and I'm not finding them. So yeah, there's a lot of people doing it. all
Well,
day
and
long.
every parking lot in this town involves a somewhat awkward entrance and exit. You're coming out onto a busy street, or you're trying to make a left turn out into traffic, or God help you over here, whatever that is. I just got all snarled up in there.
To back out.
Oh my God, it was unbelievable. So so that's a time situation. And when you're trying to nose back out, the number of bottlenecks in this immediate area is really quite stunning when you're late for a meeting and you're trying to find a parking space.
Yeah.
Like I was.
We, in Portsmouth, I might have mentioned this, but when I was parking director there, we were allowing, first floor parking garages as part, as the city was being rebuilt basically in the 90s. And we were allowing parking garages on the first floor with these giant development, and that was going in, and I was the transportation director. So I was quickly seeing there was no pedestrian safety. We were having curb cuts everywhere, and these things were holding lots of cars. So thankfully, kind of put an end to that and said, why don't we we knew the city was going to rebuild. We knew what the land use, what the trip rates were going to be. Let's build the parking on the outside. So we redeveloped some of the lots downtown. There's still maybe one or two, like the infill. And then we went outside and we said, what's available? Let's get it. Some of it we own. And did it solve all their traffic problems? No, but it's a much friendlier pedestrian environment in Market Square than it was, in my opinion, doing that.
I have a couple of questions. It seems that since the parking initiative started, there are fewer parking places downtown. For instance, we've lost the Christian Science Church parking lot, and is there some initiative to get that back, to have an agreement with them? But also, you've mentioned a couple of times that paid parking will encourage paid or at least private parking, but I don't understand how that follows. Are people going to turn their front yards into parking lots?
You know, I don't know, an example might be the Camden Parking Company does hourly parking and says, oh, wait a minute, there's a market for hourly parking. There isn't right now, it's free.
Right.
And all of a sudden, all their changes, the gate and how they operate that lot could potentially change. They would make a lot more revenue. You would promote the heck out of that lot. I mean, I was over there still today. It was still lots of space. And I'm not casting aspersion. There is no economic incentive, but there would be.
Right.
And we see this. We've seen it in Mystic. We've seen it in other. They come in, they develop them. Some towns have a permit for being a parking operator because you want to make sure it's safe, it's being run appropriately. But that's what we see. I mean,
I was going to comment on that. So thanks for bringing that up. I think, Ken, it's a good point. You know, you mentioned earlier zoning forever was, you know, you come up, the traffic engineers come up with a new demand on what we're going to require for all uses in a town per square foot for parking. We had some of that, you know, as high as every other community requirement, parking requirements. We reduced those requirements and those were inflated already. Those standards were inflated. And so we got rid of a lot of those standards. And I think what you'll see, and I think I agree with you, is that Camden Parking and other lots, the Rennies across from Rennies, if something like this happens, the market will just say, hey, it makes sense for us to now, you know, we don't have those required. We don't have to have those leases with all those different business owners because they don't need that parking technically anymore.
So you think there are already existing lots that are just not used because there's no incentive?
I do. I do.
John, do you want to
for
click
sure.
back to, because John surveyed those lots, like the Congo Church lot and the Camden Parking Company lots and.
I do. I think
But,
that's
you know, the
exactly what
ones-
happens,
Those
Ken.
gated ones across, like next to Eric's.
yeah, there were,
Oh, yeah. Oh,
yeah, and that's just a few of them. I think we list, you know, there you go, right there. I mean, those 4 lots, and I'm not saying Bella Point Reserve, you know, but during your peak hour, what's that? 280 spaces, 285 spaces, something that are empty. 280, boy, what you could do with 285 spaces here, right? Those are empty and they're in your downtown, and it's your busiest hour of the year. I mean, so you certainly want to reach out to these people and see if there's anything that can be done. But again, without the economic incentive, sometimes that's kind of happy with my monthlies, leave me alone, you know. So
That's just a few of the lots that are around.
that's just a few. Yeah, those are some of the bigger numbers that we put up, but there's others you'll see in the study.
Yeah, thank you. I don't have an idea what it would look like to downtown Camden. I know you don't mean parking meters at every other lot, but what does it look like to a place, to Main Street, to have it posted and the infrastructure to accept fees? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the kiosks have gotten much smaller, the on-street ones in particular. I mean, the ones in the lots are fairly subtle, but they're getting smaller and, you know, there will be a little post. Sometimes we put them, you know, near a tree or other monuments or on bump outs and try to put them in areas that aren't too obtrusive, standing in someone's window or something. But you'd have one for every, you know, 8 to 12 spaces, parallel, right?
Yeah.
So where you have the head in, like on Chestnut Street, you can double that. You can have 1 meter because there's half the distance. You can have one handling, you know, 16 to 24. So, yeah, you're not going to see them like single space meters every
Right.
stall and that kind of thing. That's kind of going away. And even with that, you have options now on side streets to not do any pay stations, just do QR code or text to pay. And if they don't have a smartphone to do that, they can simply walk to the corner and there'll be one right there. So if they park on the side street, a lot of communities are doing this now. There's no kiosk. You have to just walk to the corner and pay there if you don't want to use the.
So I work well by examples. So for instance, at the foot of Pearl Street or at the end of C Street, I see a lot more parking going to happen on C Street, for instance. So you would need a kiosk in these residential side streets then?
Residential?
Well, that's what, when you say side street, remember, I say residential.
Yeah, Pearl and C would not have meters on it, right? They would not be metered.
So those are still free.
Yeah, they'd still be free. My point was just that you know, if in search of free parking, some of the employees go out to a certain area and they consume an area, you don't have a lot of multifamily housing where there's no parking, which I have in almost every other city that I'm working. In those areas, we will look at doing some resident restrictions to make sure the resident can get in from shopping at the groceries and make sure they have a space in front of their house. That's all.
So
I don't think you have
agree as a general description. I don't know where the tipping point is, but there's frustration with lack of parking, but there'll be frustration with parking meters as well. And I don't know where the tipping point is and which side of the line we should be coming
Yeah.
down on.
And that's my point. I think my advice would be on a policy perspective, you're considering the paid parking. Again, the visitor customers expecting to pay for it, the tourists. You don't have a lot of people screaming in Portsmouth, and these are very busy places, Bar Harbor, but you have other users, you have employees, you have residents to think about, employees to think about. You've got regular customers here to think about. That's just a few. So there's things you can do for them. There's promotions you can do for them to make it easier, whether it's a price promotion, a pass or something. So I think the thing to do is they say, well, what about this guy? What about this guy? Make a list of all that and say, well, how can we make it easier for them? And every community is different on it. You can look at some other communities. I can provide them to you and see what they do. And discount this, discount that, provide this, provide that. Short-term run in and out every block. It runs the gamut to try to take care of those non-visitor customer tourists who want to pay, basically.
Do you have any examples of communities choosing not based, like how to help people, not based so much on, like we've kicked around like senior citizens, and none of those work that great, like Camden resident, like those aren't really getting to the people that might really actually need help? Is there any kind of income-based system? Or I've really only encountered a couple people there where it's like, it's almost like extenuating circumstances where it seems like, yeah, for that person, it is a hardship and they're working on, they row their dinghy in the harbor every day, and they're, teach people about the water, and it's somebody who's sort of a staple of the community.
The greatest thing about the pay by plate is that you can provide a permit for virtually anything you can think of. We do permits that are issued at a laptop on the spot for a resident permit. I have a visitor come in, I'm having a graduation party I need for 7. We can issue them right on the spot with the license plates. Goes right to the enforcement's handheld. He says, you have a 1-day permit. So fisherman permits, all tied to the license, everything's to the license plate. There's an endless number of permits. If I get all of the communities, because some communities like you guys have fishermen that have to get there. That's one example group. But you
Or
can
like even, is it crazy to say, well, some guy who has been going down to the public landing in the afternoon every day with this really cool car that he restored, and he talks to tourists about history, and that is not a person actually that I'm thinking of, but there are similar situations.
Yes, in Plymouth, we had seniors that would go, I don't know if anyone's been to Plymouth, Mass, but you'll see there's a seawall that expands the whole area from Plymouth Rock all the way down, and parking all along there, paid parking. The seniors wanted to go there early in the morning, and they want to walk. They want to walk the walkway and back. They've been doing it for decades. That's what they do. But there's paid parking now. They're allowed to do it. And that one's as simple as we have enforcement that recognizes, that they can do that they can park in the morning, not once we get to the busy 11 o'clock. They can't extend those. They always did morning walks. And so the policymaker said, we want to keep doing that. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I mean,
And they were able to do that without saying parking is free for all senior citizens?
it's not something that's promoted. It's something that they had done and enforcement handles. That's
It's
the
like
way
a
they did it.
Call Randy
Well,
situation.
I'm not saying Randy should do that, but that's what they did. I mean, there's other,
Call Spencer.
yeah.
Yes.
I have a question.
Oh, sorry.
I might have this went over before, but when you mentioned something about the merchants validating someone's parking, does that just make it free, or do the merchants pay for that?
I mean, it can be a discount to them, but usually it's free if it's a low, like a lot of gyms are doing it now. And because they're trying to put gyms downtown with no parking, bigger cities. And we do a lot with them. So the most common is that, maybe the town and the merchant split the cost of that parking. There has to be some checks and balances on that to make sure it's not like being given out to customers but it's not that difficult. And they, like I say, all they do is someone paid for the parking. They just go in, they have access to the system. They have to register with the town and they can validate it from their laptop and it just basically zeroes out their credit card on the spot. And then there's a report that goes back to the town on a monthly basis and you just reconcile it every month. Well, you would be reconcile it every month, send them an invoice. And that's what, there's other ways you can do it with coupon codes too. You can give the business coupon codes. We do that a lot with special events. And then just the coupon code's only good during the special event. So when people come in for the special event, they plug in the coupon code and they get free parking. They get the parking. So there's a couple of examples of how we do validations, but it's pretty routine now.
So the town just comps that just because it's verified that somebody's going to a specific business? Or the business pays for it and as part of a monthly invoicing?
Yeah, the business would pay monthly. They
Okay.
pay let's say it was a 50-50 split, they would pay their 50% share.
What do you mean by 50-50 split? Like,
Well, if I parked 1 hour, I'm validating you for 1 hour, it's $2. The town pays $1 and they pay $1. So each pay $1.
the town, okay.
The town and the merchant. So the merchant would get an invoice from the town. Because the data that when they validate it goes right to the town. The town will see it immediately that they just made it a validation. And it's the system set up to send them invoices at the end of the month to pay their validations.
So, but then the town would lose revenue.
Yep.
No,
So
I
when
thought
the
all of
business
Town
these
loses-
businesses.
Town loses revenue on any promotion you do, whether it's an employee permit, resident permit. And every town does this, by the way. Every town loses money on all of those promotions because you're basically taking the 2-hour rate, either paying for it or discounting it.
Right.
So that's why, when you get a policy
How do you
group
choose
together,
which businesses though? Because all of the people downtown are going to one of the businesses.
well, the idea for the communities is it's such a great thing. We want to boost loyalty for regular customers of our downtown.
Oh, right.
The town
'cause it
sees of
targets
economic
regulars.
value in bringing these customers downtown to regular, because it is hard to get.
So it's just regular. They're able to target, the businesses give these codes to the regular customers, not everybody.
They can give it to, typically it's the regulars that they're trying to,
Okay, that makes sense.
because they're the ones that have the most difficulty with the price point.
Right.
Some people are going to come to Camden, see $2 an hour and say, oh my God, it's only $2 an hour. They are going to say that because it's higher in most, and of course they go to Bar Harbor and they see what it costs there. I think $4.
The public landing was still full most of the time, is still full most of the time, even with the,
Yeah, I mean, Mystic, Connecticut is a flat rate $25 when you pull into their lot. Flat rate, and it's full. So they're going to see that and they're going to say $2. That's pretty decent. So they're only going to give that promotion to people that they're concerned about. Like I think Chris was saying, someone who's
oh,
Might
that's
be
a
a
good,
regular,
that makes sense.
And there's going to be like a committee and like you can basically change this every quarter or every, whatever you determine the frequency of the committee meetings. And then they're going to make recommendations and then they'll probably bring it to the select board and they'll make decisions on what's going to be done. And that can be evolved like continuously. And it doesn't have to be any one thing. You have an estimated revenue of $500,000. If you decide you want to give $100,000 out of the way and to different benefits for the local people or whoever it is,
Yep.
the committee will be able to do that and make those adjustments. It's just a decision you have to make whether or not we want to give that up or not and what it's worth.
Well, and that's a really great point because in the study we talk about a parking benefit district. That's what it is. It's a benefit district, produces revenue to better the downtown. It's a user fee, Steve's saying. So you don't want to involve the taxpayer in parking, right? They're probably not even using the parking.
Right.
So it's a user
taxpayers
fee.
use the parking.
Some do, but not everyone, right?
But I don't know. our taxes are about to go up a good amount. We don't know what the impact is going to be. And then we're going to try to tell people, oh, and by the way, now you need to go ahead and pay for parking downtown, even though your taxes just went up.
But communities have reduced the general fund with that parking revenue district. So in many communities, the parking, that excess, not all of the revenue, because you have to support your downtown parking. I mean, that's the user fee, right? You don't want to take the money from them and give them a terrible parking experience. So you do want to reinvest in your parking and your walking and everything that goes with parking. But there may be a surplus that goes off the general fund and reduces the tax rate. That's not unusual. Some go right to the schools, but some.
Right.
So, and I can give you examples. Certainly after Audrey, I can provide some.
I mean, just to add to what you're saying, like we just have a bond. We just approved a bond to do some major improvements on some of the major streets in town, and part of that, some of that funding can also go towards, making more parking in those areas that we are expanding and doing the infrastructure improvements in.
Yeah.
So, and it would only expand the parking and reduce the cost to the taxpayer.
That's a
at the same
great
time.
point.
I mean, that's
Great point.
Debt service on the bond.
right,
with
exactly,
parking revenue.
right. And so it's
Which
just
hasn't hit our budget yet.
like
Right.
Mountain Street. Mountain Street is one of the ones that's slated to do possibly some sewer work. And then, Mountain Street's a very wide street. All of the stormwater is bad on one side of it. Once we fix all of that, we'll probably be able to create a whole bunch of parking on that road.
Good point.
And some of the parking revenue can pay for some of that bond for that work. And then that doesn't come out of taxes. So that's really the reality of the whole thing. It's really going to cut into the tax burden as opposed to make it worse.
No, but it makes it feel worse for the people who live in the town, who just had their taxes raised. And now they're then having to pay to park downtown too.
But
I don't know if people will like that.
but it'll feel worse like after you do the you do the bond work, and then you don't have that revenue to help pay for the bond, and then the taxes have to go up more. That would feel worse to me, I would think, in the following year than if I had the parking.
Well, and I think being mindful of the time frame of saying this is a limited time frame. And if we're making opportunities for residents to incentivize residents at a reduced rate, and then once the season is over, you're not paying for parking, and presumably we've improved the quality of parking
Right.
for everyone all year round for those 8 months out of the year where we don't have a crunch on parking. I think people would feel like there is a net benefit
Right.
ultimately. I mean, you would hope.
Yeah, I think some people would look at it and see it that people from away, the visitors, the tourists that are coming here, are paying for some of this work that needs to happen, rather than the taxpayers paying for it.
Yeah, I think so.
This is just like paying for your trash. It's just like 20 years ago, the Midco Solid Waste was totally in debt, was borrowing all this money from Camden. All the 4 towns that were a part of it had assessments that were at least double what they are now. And they finally said, oh my God, we got to do something. And they went to this pay as you throw system where everybody, you pay for what you throw away, not for what your neighbor throws away, because it's a resource that's not used equally by everybody. And parking and the roads and enforcement and all of this stuff downtown is very, very expensive. And all of the pavement, all of the repairs, and it's not used equally by everybody. And so it's basically, if we don't try to recover some of that, then we're just forcing everybody in town to subsidize something that is only used by some people. And it's just not fair. I think it's just an irresponsible thing for us to do. You can't look at our budget and say, okay, let's take 500, let's just try to reduce taxes by reducing expenses instead. Taking $500,000 or $400,000 or $100,000 out of our budget even you're going to have some major deficits in service in order to accomplish that. So
Especially with no ability in Maine to get, there's no local option sales tax. There's no lodging tax that comes to the municipality for all these tourists that are coming.
we can't
here and
tax
all
short-term rentals
Right.
or.
So it's just that's how I see
Few
these
revenue sources that you.
revenue sources.
And it's not year round.
It's not year round, and it's the people from away generally that are going to be paying the
Yeah.
bulk share of that cost,
Right.
of that. Those
And I
funds.
should have paid something today. I was lazy. I didn't plan ahead of time. Actually, like,
Spencer,
I
give me a
could-
phone so I can get-
I'm like the perfect
Where's your
example
car?
of, like, I'm perfectly capable of walking from my house on Mechanic Street or parking a little further away. I was running late, and so I decided, I thought I was running late. Turns out I was actually running almost an hour early. But like, I can do it, and if you just have to make it slightly more inconvenient for me, and then that space will either I should pay for the privilege of being able to park in that high demand spot, or I can walk a little further. I mean, there are a lot of people like me, I think.
The Midcoast Solid Waste assessment to the towns hasn't risen in 5 years because we have a fee-based system where the users pay for that difference.
Right.
And to be able to hold a tax rate for 5 years at the same rate with adjusting the fees and having the user pay for the increase, who's using it more, makes more sense than having everybody pay for it. So, I mean, that's really a good example that Allison's using there.
So you mentioned this 15-minute free option. If people abuse that and exceed that, does that still rely on a human to enforce that, or is there a mechanism?
Yeah, it's a little clunky with that, and that's why some communities opt to let's just do one space every block, or something like, Haverhill's doing that now. It's just like, because they have so many restaurants that it's really become a little foodie area.
Is that excluded from the,
Yeah,
Something
there's clearly a
altogether?
different stall that is just well marked. That's 20-minute free. They're hard to enforce. You guys would have a heck of a time doing it because most of their routes are going to be the 3-hour route or 2-hour route. You have to almost set up a separate route. You don't have to do it every day, but you do it once in a while. You do a 30-minute loop and you hit all those spaces. Bit of a pain for enforcement, but so a lot of communities do it that way because with a paid situation, you still have to register your parking session. So in other words, you still have to, on your phone, say, start the session, and you have to be back in 15 minutes. It will say no charge. Or you have to go to the kiosk and it will give you a no charge. But, so it's a little bit, that's why I say some opt for just.
John, I think what might take some of the anxiety out of this, because there's always going to be that anxiety to change, is the fact that this is a living system.
Right.
That when we start seeing things that maybe the town doesn't like, or you're hearing as select board members, or we're hearing as town employees, that we think ought to change, that group can get together.
Yes.
And these things can be changed almost instantaneously. If you decide you don't want to give the 15 minutes or you want to give a half hour, those are all things that can be changed and modified with us as we proceed with it, if we proceed with it.
Really good
So
point.
that's the beauty of the system, is because you can set it up the way the town wants it. Not everybody's going to be happy with every decision, but if the majority says, hey, let's try this, if we try it and it doesn't work, it can be changed pretty quick.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the importance of quarterly meetings, especially during the parking season, to see where we're coming up with problems. Because the enforcement officers are going to hear on the streets, what's working, what's not working. And they typically hear that every day of what they, but I can tell you that I see a lot of turnover down there in the parking lot. I ride down through a couple times a day, and there always seems to be a few spaces
Yeah.
that you weren't seeing before in the public landing lot.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Chief, because I think I think you guys going with the pilot program is very smart. I mean, because you got your foot in a little bit. You could see there's some trickiness to it. You've got to understand the software on that side. Become familiar with it before you implement the whole thing. And you can we didn't mention this, but you can still phase forward. You don't have to roll the entire thing out. You can roll out pieces of it, a portion of it, expand, wait to see what the data looks like there. To your point, and Dave's as well. The parking committee sits down quarterly, looks at the data and says, well, we had some unintended consequences when we thought this was going to happen, but when we changed this pricing, they went there. And you make the change. As
and
Chief says, it's quick.
And I can say that we have come into some issues and that we've encountered, and we've taken some corrective action to make those accommodations for people that, we might not have thought there was going to be an impact. And once we saw it, We've been able to issue some permits and whatnot. So those things are getting ironed out as we've gone along. I think the other thing with the paid parking is when you come to some place that has paid parking, you know you're paying for that parking. When you park somewhere where you think it's free and you stay over and then you come back and you've got a $30 ticket, the experience is much less
Yeah.
pleasurable.
Yeah.
So if you're already paying up front,
Yeah.
it also, you're collecting that money that a lot of times with our tickets, when we issue those, they go unpaid. So the revenue that is generated is obviously
Well,
good for the town.
that's another great point. I mean, I often hear is like, every town has to get the turnover because it will die. If shops will, they need to have that movement. And I used to say when my parking garage in Portsmouth, High Hanover, I needed 3 users in that garage. I needed the employee, I needed the customers in the same space. And then at night I had to have the resident. If I didn't have all 3, I wasn't going to pay my bond. So I had to get that turnover in the garage. Similarly on the street, you have to get the turnover. Would you rather do it on the back of a parking ticket? Or would you rather do it with a reasonable price at the meeting? And that's really what it comes down to. Because if you're not getting the turnover, but if you really wanted to get the turnover on the back of a ticket, it would be the most unfriendly.
I think that's
Feeling.
the best. I think that's the best message right there
Try that too.
on the reason for it.
Is
What
there,
was that? What was that, Jeremy? What-
I think what John just said is the best messaging point on this.
Which was what? I missed it.
Which is there, every downtown that's successful strives for turnover in their commercial zone. And we're talking about street parking because that's a precious commodity you can't build any more of it. And so they're all trying to get as many customers through to make sure the businesses are successful. And they really have 2 options to get that. Option 1 is to enforce a free zone and write tickets necessary to get that, not 1 in 4 breaking the 2-hour zone, but everybody following the 2-hour zone. That's a lot of tickets to write to try to get the turnover. Or you go with a reasonable fee, $2 an hour, something that most of the parkers are expecting to pay. So, and that's what they're forced with. Ultimately, why are all these coastal communities charging for parking? They get down to this system. They try to enforce. They write those $35 tickets. And by the way, it's $50 in most of the places we go. And it's difficult, right, to write that $50 ticket to a resident, never mind the away, and or to a customer, and then collect on that, and then they come to appeals. They take a day out. It's so trust me when I tell you the communities have tried it, and if you look up and down the coast, you'll see how many are left not doing it because they haven't been successful in creating a friendly atmosphere that way.
John, I'd just throw out another thing that I've seen since we've been doing the pilot project. One of the biggest complaints I always had every summer is that we offer 2-hour boat tours, but we had 2-hour parking. So these people were getting back off the boats and immediately coming back to parking tickets. And there was a constant line at the PD of people complaining about it. This is a rigged system, basically, is what it was. I don't think I have talked to anybody since paid parking went into the public landing that has had a complaint about coming back and having a ticket because they paid the fee. They knew there was a fee, and it took that out of the equation.
Yeah.
So that reduced our parking complaints, and I would say by 50% of what we used to get every day.
Yeah, and that's a great example of what's out there because really in parking practitioners are trying to do away with time limits altogether. That's all of our plan. No one wants to write a ticket on someone who stayed too long. They enjoyed their time here in Camden too long.
And we
wrote 'em a
modified that at the public landing because we saw that need to go to 4 hours instead of the 3.
Well, that's right.
So that
That's
was a
right.
change that we were able to make.
That's right.
Like we can with this system.
Yep.
And I did hear someone that went downtown when they were taking a look at that they did appreciate how many over hour it is because of what you just said, Randy, because of the trips.
Yeah, and that's like I said, that's the beauty of the system. We can make those changes as we find and encounter problems and we need to know, or we do find out that we have to make that change. So
I'm just curious, so you gentlemen are the enforcers?
we're in a transition.
You're in, okay.
Adrian is our brand new parking enforcement officer who's
Welcome,
being
Adrian.
trained. Spencer will
Spencer's-
eventually transfer out into regular patrol, but he's going to train Adrian.
So Are there any,
They'd run.
are there any particular observations you would have or areas of, I don't know. I'm just interested in your perspective as the enforcer, like what's been the hardest part for you and where do you see the greatest possible benefits of making this kind of transition?
Well,
Slide the microphone.
we're writing a lot less tickets this year than we did last year. Because we changed the handicap parking. We used to charge handicap people for parking down at the landing. Changed that. I used to be writing like 50 tickets a day, doing like 20, 25 a day now. I'm not seeing a lot of turnover on street. Most of the tickets are for 2 hours. I think that's the biggest problem area is the 2 hour parking. I think it needs to be longer or metered.
We essentially have paid parking now on street,
Right.
and it's by
It's a
ticket.
ticket.
Right.
Because they know what the fee is going to be for the parking ticket,
And they're willing to pay
so they're
that.
willing to pay it.
Mhm. Even what is it now, 30?
20.
It's 20. Okay.
It's 30 down at the landing.
It's still cheap.
Yeah, we weren't
parking.
brave enough. That still felt, because it was 10 before. It was. And we doubled it and that was like, okay, we gotta go slow. But sometimes $20 is worth it to.
And I think that's why we're seeing a reduce in the tickets on street, because we did go up on the price of it, so.
And then a lot of them don't even pay
Right.
the ticket.
That is one thing though with that I heard, I know this isn't, the enforcement is separate from the paid parking in some ways, but people equate it some because they're like, oh, well, they're doing that paid parking thing and we've changed what our enforcement is or we increased fees at the same time. So I heard the frustrations I thought was really reasonable was the turnaround time. So if you didn't pay in 7 days or something, and then it doubled or, and then that gets into a situation where people have like way more than they can pay. And I'd like to really revisit that kind of stuff.
That's all policy driven.
Okay, not a policy we
That's-
set. That must have been some kind of default
No,
software.
We did not. That's not anything that the police department, I just want to make sure that everybody knows it. The police department didn't come up with any of these figures on their own and add these into a system.
That would have been a lot of work. I'm not alleging that. I'm
No,
just
no,
thinking
no,
it
I
was
just
some
want to
kind
make.
of like- I don't think it came from, I didn't say, oh yeah, double it after 7 days.
Trust
I
me,
know I
everybody
didn't
thinks the
vote on
money all
that.
goes to the police department. We have this big fund. We
I
don't.
was sort of imagining it was like some kind of default software option that was happening.
No, that's just late fees for not paying your tickets on
It says in
time.
the
That-
ordinance
that
48
was-
hours.
I think you'll find that
I've
was,
done parking tickets and
that was
my whole
approved.
life, and
Yeah.
that was approved.
Interesting.
It was approved.
you slipped it in there. I'm just kidding. I know you're not trying to, but we should, I
Who's
guess I
Jeremy?
would request that we revisit that so that we actually know what we're
That's-
doing, because I oftentimes don't even check my mail for 7 days.
Right, exactly. You get, all of a sudden, you got the ticket, and that's, if you haven't paid it in 7 days.
Oh,
it's
you missed the
double.
deadline, it's, it's,
That's pretty steep.
Yeah.
Double.
we don't want to make it,
You may be on a trip.
It started out higher than.
maybe that is reasonable to start it out higher, but the late penalty stuff that ends up penalizing people a lot of the time that don't have time to check their mail or are disorganized or
That wouldn't be.
I think a lot more than.
Or don't
paying-
have a permanent place to.
I think a lot more
People
paying it
like
that
me.
way than it is
Can't get their
buying a
life
kiosk.
Yeah.
Right? You pay for that space with your kiosk at $2 an hour as opposed to the 30 plus the
late fee.
penalty, the late fee. You're just through the roof, right?
Yeah, I mean, I use the one down at the public landing all the time. And the first day I was really annoyed because I didn't have the app and I couldn't figure out how to use the whole thing where you punch in something. And the tourists were coming up though, just like, no problems. I was trying to watch them. I really struggled though. And it gave me empathy for people that would be resisting this. And I realized that for some of them, I think they're just resisting the hassle of it all. And then I finally got the app going and that works perfectly and it alerts me 15 minutes ahead. But for somebody that doesn't have the fluency that doesn't have a smartphone, being told just get better at using that kiosk thing, it's just annoying. So I don't know if there are better systems or better maybe looking at kiosks that are better than others? In terms of-
Sometimes, you know, and it's not a bad thing to do, is to be at the kiosk and deal, whether it's seniors or anyone else who has a technology issue, you know, you see where they're struggling. Sometimes it's you know, all these kiosks have instructions on them, and they have, you know, a illuminated pad, and it's telling you every step. But oftentimes I go to them and I'm like, oh, this is not that intuitive. I go to different communities, and that's the first thing I do is get on there. And sometimes it will, you know, as simple as like touch the screen to start. They don't have that message. So people are looking at, you know, and we like to design them such that they put a coin in it, it just lets it starts. Anything they do starts it. But sometimes there's an intuitive thing, and you can just stand with some folks and say, what are you having troubles with? And maybe you change the direction slightly. That's something I always encourage, you know, I mean.
I suggest everybody bring a 12-year-old with them because that's what I have to do with anything banking related or tickets or any of that. So
But I do
Yeah,
think it would be important
I-
for the town employees to actually try to use it. Like everybody that's doing this, promoting it or going down and actually doing it.
field trip.
Right. So we can time everybody and see how they perform.
Camden, I mean, Rockland is also with their installation, will be training users over there as well. So, I mean, I was going to say, you know, in the metro areas in Mass, you know, everybody has metered parking. So everyone's pretty fluent on the different systems. Every once in a while you come up with a quirky one. But when you're kind of separated from a lot of paid systems, Portland's a long way from here. Yeah, it's a bigger issue, but maybe with Rockland also educating people right now on their system. That'll help the text to pay. And so.
Yeah, every
Well-
tourist handles it just fine, it seems like, but
Yeah, anecdotally, just because Rockland is doing it, sometimes that causes a knee-jerk reaction in Camden to do the opposite. It's not necessarily a selling point or whatever Rockland does to say that Rockland is doing it, therefore it's good for Camden. Some Camdenites don't appreciate that, and maybe it's the 30% rule, but everything, maybe it's just the curmudgeons. I don't know. But
I just want to be clear. We started
it's about
before
the
Rockland.
Absolutely.
Rockland is following
They're
us.
copying.
We are not following Rockland.
Good point.
John can verify.
Yes, that is absolutely true.
But yeah, I've seen people struggle with the paid kiosk down, you know, trying to get the ticket out. And yeah, most people have more gray hair than me who are having that issue. I know that like in Brookline, Mass, where my daughter lives, I've never paid for parking there, even though there's a meter whenever I visit, because, you know, sometimes I'm tech challenged too. And maybe not have my phone at the time, which would be weird because I can only find her home by GPS. But yeah, not maybe there's a lot of gray hair people who are smarter than me, and maybe it's just not the gray hair. But that can, you know, cause some fumbling. I'm an auditor. I'm supposed to be a curmudgeon.
Any other issues that we want to tackle? Or questions about any other place, or I'm happy to answer.
I was glad to hear the handicap thing got resolved, because I had
Yeah.
forgotten to ask about that.
People are happy
and
about that.
About which thing, Allison?
The discrepancy about whether handicapped parking.
Oh,
spots
yeah.
are free or not.
Yeah. I know we talked about other permittable free parkers where I know some towns do it for veterans. Maybe it would be good to see your laundry list of these are the types of successful permits that have maybe softened the blow to some of the areas. You said that there's a long list. It would be interesting to see what that list is of exceptions made. And I'm still curious, and I have not talked to anyone at Old Orchard, but why they decided that they needed to go to 30 minutes for free parking everywhere, because otherwise it was hurting businesses. And I know we've talked about business hurting. There's recognition that there could be lost business, but that amount is unknown. That's never a great feeling to try to promote this in town to say, yeah, you're going to have an impact, but I don't know what it's going to be. I don't think it'll be much though. You know, it's tough. I wish there was something more solid that we could go on besides other things that are in the news about other people who are reducing their paid parking stuff.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, there is a correlation. There've been studies done. You know, some of the most successful cities have the highest parking rates, and that and there's something to that. Of course, that reflects land value too. So there's a lot of variables in there. But certainly in New England, some of the highest rates are in some of the most successful downtowns. But that doesn't totally answer your question on that. I do think on promotions, you know, are really geared toward individual communities. And I just completed some work down south in a community that, yeah, they have veterans, a couple of spots here and there, but it was catered to people who were right there. That's a decision they made. So all these decisions are really based on what you have here, where your pinch points are, where you're hearing from your community. Your individual difficulty in hiring employees is going to set rates. I mean, you've got to factor that in. That's an issue here, right? Is finding people to do some of the work. So I don't know that would get what you want on that, because I can certainly give you examples, but I think that really is so catered to the individual community. But I can give you a laundry list of how many there are out there. There's probably 30 permits out there, different types of permits that get issued.
I think just, the more that we can know about it.
Sure. Absolutely, I could provide that.
Certainly a good thing.
Yep.
To see what else can be done for accommodation.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's not a problem. And there are some communities that really have no permits. They feel like
Right.
they just meter the commercial zone, and they provide free parking outside of that. And they're like, well, maybe we'll let residents park in the garage on Sundays, and that's it. So it really runs the gamut. I mean, but I can give you a list of the different types of permits for sure.
So I guess, and I'm just trying to get an idea from the select board. There was talk about doing another parking survey, given, when parking was surveyed here, it was 2021, 22. Chris expressed an interest, but I'm just trying to get a sense if the rest of you think it would be a worthwhile exercise.
What does that consist of?
So
A survey of users or a survey of available parking, or what is it?
So it's like the occupancy rates. So John sent people out to, count spaces and look at how frequently they're occupied, turnover, adherence to posted time limits, all that kind of thing.
Do you think that's a good idea?
Were you here when we on the lake? That was
No.
so there was some questioning of the data, whether
Validity because of COVID.
Right.
It started when COVID happened, right?
So
how
I
much time
guess,
does that, is that just a matter of somebody going out and being like,
Yeah,
it's about the same?
Couple of
or
days.
I
Yeah,
don't want to do anything that would.
why I probably wouldn't recommend it is I think that when John and his team went and surveyed everything, it was, aside from like 2020 to 2021, it had it was still during COVID. So we had lower numbers than we do like now, for instance. So I think that if it's resurveyed, you're just going to find the problems even worse than what John based his recommendations off. So
That's true.
yeah, you're just going to find that there's even more call for paid parking, not less, between when he did that work and now.
Well, then it might be a good thing to show so that it would better support a decision for paid parking then. I like the idea of getting rid of an excuse to poke at the data by saying your data's old or was not during a current time. Just because there's so much change and people won't know either in town, I suspect, of, well, gee, just like my question was earlier, because I couldn't remember, it was really close to the same time. So when did the bump out change happen? When did we reduce the number of spaces in town? Because some might say, geez, we reduced the number of spaces in town and now we're going to charge for those that are remaining. No wonder why demand is up.
I mean,
So I'm just trying to think of ways to reduce, probably myself and others, that, you know, we're taking this seriously. We realize the data is older and at a time that it was not like it is now. You know, why give people the reason to say, oh, you know, you guys didn't double check?
I mean,
That's me.
I think if there's a way to do something that's relatively quick, it would be valuable, but not so much valuable for the larger community. I'm not hearing that they are mostly making their decisions based on a detailed look at data. I think I think your opinion, Chris, will matter to especially some of the people that might be doubtful. And
Mhm.
so if to you, this is something that makes a difference in whether you support it or not, then I think it would be a valuable exercise. But I think, you know, sometimes there's things will get brought up like, okay, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? If you're going to feel the same way after more data as you feel now, then I don't think it's worth it. I think we should just kind of have the argument now. But if that's a deciding factor for you, then I think it maybe would be for other people. And like, I would support doing it, if that makes sense.
Well, part of the thing of having a discussion is trying to sometimes influence or change folks' perspective. So, you know, giving them all the data they can have, you have a better chance of changing perspectives and potentially changing minds and opinions, or giving me a reason for why I should change my mind. Well, yeah, it's even worse.
Right. So I guess that's what I'm interested in, is possibly changing your mind. And so you have to give us kind of like the likelihood that that's gonna happen. Where is this? How do you need to see that the problem's gotten worse in order to change your mind, or do you think that? I mean, is this just slowing us down, like slowing down the
No.
inevitable, or is this?
It seemed like it was going to be a fairly easy thing to do, and easy, maybe low cost to do. So why not do it?
Oh, I thought for a second I thought you meant paid parking overall. I was like, yeah, I think it is. What kind of data validation could happen? You're good at this stuff, Chris. Why don't you go out and count cars?
Could have enforcement do it.
I don't know how it was done before. I imagine it would be best if it's the same sort of folks who went ahead and did it the first time to do it the second time, so that it's consistently done. I don't know what the approach was. I don't know. So I would think that we would have people to try to maintain consistency, you know, same folks and approach.
How much do you think it would be worth to spend on such an exercise?
I have no idea how much it costs to begin with to do it the first time.
Yeah, I don't remember.
So having our patrol people go out and validate it wouldn't be sufficient, or
No,
I mean,
it's
we
not.
can-
No, it's like a scientific test. You want to do the test as much as possible, close to what you did the first time. We've got
I
to,
could
you know,
take
try to
drone
make
shots
it-
and we could count at different times of the day. And
That's not the way it was done the first time, I don't believe.
how
I
was it
think
done
we
the
should-
first time?
Relatively inexpensive. I mean, we can talk about it, but I
That means
a few
something
thousand
different.
dollars.
Yeah, give us a ballpark. Less
A few
than.
$1,000s, I would say.
Oh.
I mean, it's really fine. Yeah. It's 2 days, you know, depending on, the contract people are sometimes hard to find to do that. That's the only, in short term. Because the only other thing is you would be doing it, tough to get that done in August, but
What month did we do it before?
Late
July. But, July and
Okay, we already missed
July
it.
and August, if I show you the revenue of all the communities on the coast, July and August are almost identical. Some are higher August, some are higher July, but they're right at the top. September drops. It's not quite as busy because everyone's back to school.
Then we got to look at the weather
I
and
know,
all that
well,
stuff, you know.
no, I'm not so much worried about the weather as long as it's not raining. We'd have to have an option for doing another day if that were the case, like the next day. But we'd be watching the weather. But more worried about, yeah, you'd have a small drop to September. It's not substantial. And I have rates to kind of normalize that with a July and August. You know, it's not a shoulder season. October would be like a shoulder.
I mean, the reality
Possible
is,
find a parking spot right now.
everybody knows that it's very difficult to park during June, July, August, September. We know that. We don't need a study to tell us that.
We do have that though.
And we have that.
And we like
And
5
then we
committees
know
before.
that it gets a lot easier from October to May, during which time we would suspend paid parking. So we're in this situation where we know there's a massive influx of people looking for parking spaces. We know there's income to be generated. And the vast majority of people are not going to be swayed by a data point difference one way or another by doing a second survey. In my opinion, I just don't know that we're going to find some extraordinarily different set of data that's going to say, oh yeah, it's really bad now, and it's going to be a lot easier in a month. And we're going to charge this much for it. And a few people are going to be really irritated by it. And the vast majority of people are going to take it as a matter of course. This is what it cost to operate this system within this municipality. I don't see that if we've got data from 2 years ago, even though it was COVID, I mean, people are still moving around. It's not going to be that wildly different. I
If
can't
anything,
see.
it's worse, yeah.
Usually the complaints are that it was higher when you did the counts. Usually it's when people don't want it's the fact that there was some event or there was something unusual about that day that made it busier than normal. And so now you're saying it's worse than it actually is. It's not usually the other way. This argument sounds like it's more. COVID would definitely seemingly be less people and this would be more. So it's kind of the opposite of what would normally. I don't know.
In the bump out thing, it wasn't really the bump outs, it was adjustments for the crosswalks, and that was done like a year before we started.
that was
all this,
before,
So
yeah.
it's not even.
Crosswalks.
I could pull up articles from 1970 right now that Camden parking problem has been discussed. They had they actually got it. They had a shuttle that the 3 towns shared, and the people would be bussed out to these parking lots that were far away. They had a trolley. They were even going to use the same trolley to have sewage from Rockport transported too. The Camden parking problem is it's the eternal problem. There are like 2 other committees before this one that recommended paid parking. And then it got to the select board and the select board was like, I don't know, we're ready. So, I mean, I agree with Susan. We just need to move forward. We can always make everything free again.
And one more plug for paid parking. You'll never have to hire someone like me again, because you will have that utilization data in real time. You'll know how long everybody parked at every space
Right.
and what the occupancy levels. You're going to get a report on a monthly basis that you can generate. So data is phenomenal coming out of,
People expect us to do something after seeing the values of homes going up, after seeing the increase in budgets. They expect us to try to do something to offset that. And this is the best thing that we can come up with to offset that. And if people hate it and they want to pay more in their taxes for free parking everywhere eventually, then
When we went to Bar Harbor, Randy, Audra, and I, it was the same thing. He explained exactly what's happening here. And he said, after we implemented it, the people that were coming up with reasons why it wasn't any good slowly quieted down because they saw the revenue and how it was offsetting the taxes, and everybody became accustomed to it, and it became much more beneficial for the users and for the merchants. And you can it's almost just like deja vu listening to what he had said and what we're hearing now and where we're at. It's
Right,
just,
and
it's just identical.
To make it really clear, in Bar Harbor, they checked sales tax data before they implemented paid parking because they wanted to have the data to see what the before and after was. And sales at restaurants and retail establishments increased after paid parking. It did not decrease because people were actually able to find spaces and go into businesses downtown that probably they moved on beforehand if they couldn't.
Yeah.
So it was to a place like Bar Harbor, and I'm not saying Camden's Bar Harbor. I know we're different, but I do think that there are a lot of similar issues in terms of parking and how that impacts businesses that would be true for us as it was for Bar Harbor in terms of how it could positively impact businesses and restaurants,
And then the other
retail
part,
businesses.
to complement what she's saying, and also the way they dealt with the problems that arose as a result of it was kind of it's like a living project, and it just evolved, and they made changes as they went along, and they accommodated the things that they found were issues, and they just worked those details out as the program matured. It wasn't like it was a problem. You're not going to be able to front load all of the issues and make everybody happy before you do it. You're going to have to roll it out, and then slowly you're going to find little problems that are going to arise. The quarterly parking committee is going to meet, and they're going to say, okay, we got to do this and this, and then they're going to make the changes, and it's going to be a blip on the revenue meter about what it does to the overall project. So it's just that simple. It's not real complicated. And I think you can almost accommodate all of the little idiosyncrasies without a huge impact on the revenue. I mean, let's say you did a giveaway to everybody that had a problem with it. You still probably have half the revenue that you're projected to get. So whatever you're doing is going to be more beneficial than less. So, I mean, that's kind of my perspective on the whole thing, I think.
Doesn't the revenue have to get used for, the only other thing I've heard people like, oh, they're going to use it for whatever. Isn't there something about what parking revenue has to be used for?
So the on-street parking revenue has to be invested back into the road system. So sidewalks.
Lighting.
Are extremely expensive roads.
Yep. All the
With
Part of the bond for the road improvements.
because that bond payment that we're gonna have to make, the thing that voters overwhelmingly approved, hasn't hit our budget yet. So, I mean,
Right.
it makes lots of sense to pair this with that.
I'm sorry, did you say that the parking revenue is has restricted use to
Infrastructure, road infrastructure
Yeah.
by law, by statute.
by state law?
Yeah.
Really?
So you can't
Take it and use it like for schools,
Yeah.
like John mentioned, some other community.
Yeah, other
send it to
states.
schools, we can't do that.
Or the Montgomery Dam.
no, but I mean,
Unless we have a bridge there.
plenty of road
Oh,
stuff.
so hey, everybody, I have a
Hey,
question.
Tom.
Hey, so I heard it just said that Bar Harbor took their time and did some comprehensive studies related to sales tax. Have we initiated anything like that?
No, we haven't, but it was pretty simple. They just pulled the sales data from the state and looked at the before and after, and we can do that pretty easily and quickly.
Okay. Because, and if we did ask for more time to study this, or we did take a look at August numbers, which is the month I just thought I heard people talking about, what type of delay would that mean for implementing a more comprehensive system?
So the sales data is not going to slow anything up. I guess it's just a matter of if we decide to survey everything again, and how long that might take.
I mean, a week,
That's my question.
Yeah.
but
How long would that take?
yeah, I mean, it shouldn't be more than a week to 2 weeks. I mean, to get the data and crunch it. And the only question is whether you could get it done in August would be kind of tight. But I still don't think it would be bad after Labor Day. I don't think it would change that much in mid-September. I mean, there would definitely be a reduction from July, but we have graphs that show what that is.
That's the question for you, is can you get it done in August?
Yeah, I don't think it would be tough to do, but you could probably do it here. I understand you want to do it the same way. I don't think I'd be able to pull that off right now with my commitments, unfortunately, but you could do it yourself, run the streets and see what's out there. I mean, you've got the report and what we covered and the hours, and it would be every 2 hours for whatever it was, 8. I think it was 9 to 8, 9 in the morning to 8 at night, every 2 hours.
And who would you recommend is responsible for conducting that survey? If we're gonna do it internally?
I was just gonna put in there, I think you opened the door that. You collected the data the first time.
Right.
And
That's,
somebody else collected the data, so I
That's
would
what Chris
support
was-
that being done externally.
yeah, I think that's what Chris was saying. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So then it would be about a whole other year before we would do anything.
Well, that does bring
So
up-
for another year, you'd implement just the public landing parking, and you do some studies in the next year to come up with a more comprehensive plan for the rest of the potential paid parking areas.
Well, I think that,
What would we do with the year? We would,
Well, I'm just saying we'd have to wait a year to
right. and
survey
the
everything.
data you'd want is July and August, right? So it's like waiting for next year.
to see if it's really.
Yeah,
so it's
absolutely.
interesting.
And so did we have this information? I mean, this doesn't seem like something
yeah.
that we needed to work
Oh,
to
yeah.
discover, that maybe we wanted to survey this July and August. I'm a little disappointed that we haven't.
Oh,
taking
Tom,
the
we already
actual-
have it. This would just be doing it again.
I understand that we already have it, but, I mean, if the select board had known in, say, in June or May, that, just a little bit more information about this, because I do think it's important to have all the data, justifying the system or not. It's important.
Have you read I feel like sometimes we're losing the thread of all the different things that have been presented. Have you read the other reports or watched the other like from when they first came out?
Sure, I've looked over them, but I agree. The data's 2 years old. It was taken during COVID, and I don't know if any of us are in a position to say, what has significantly changed post-COVID, during COVID, post-COVID. I think that Camden in Maine in general received a lot of traffic in COVID. People were trying to get out of the cities. Again, I'm not saying I'm against this by any means, but I don't have any objections. And in fact, I would really encourage the opportunity to collect more data and to have a data-driven decision. And there has been a lot of good data that's been shown. I understand this was a great advocacy meeting for paid parking, but when we make decisions, just like we're doing for, say, if anybody watched the thing that Julia and Jeff Jordan did for the harbor, having data to make decisions is really the best that we can do.
Are you worried that the COVID data might have been too artificially high?
No, I have no idea what it means. I don't know. I have a comparison of that to now. I don't know if it's high. I don't know if it's low.
If anybody was down, I do find it a little bit funny because you guys aren't here, and so you didn't try to park here today, or anytime maybe this week during this time. So it's just everybody's talking about not being able to find parking spots.
Allison, tonight's parking is anecdotal. It's not like we've never been downtown.
I know.
So, we understand some of the issues of parking downtown. I don't think anybody completely understands all of them. But in the end, if more data could be ascertained without a significant delay, that's what I would favor.
I mean, Tom, I think John said he could collect the data in the next month and show, there's a normalization that he can make. Would that?
September, can we do September if?
Fine. Yeah, if you can say September, typical plus or minus 10% or whatever, August, July, but I want that to be driven by something else. I'd want that to be not just a number you're pulling out of nowhere, that September is 10% off from August.
Yeah.
That this is historical data from the coast of Maine in general.
Yeah, we could certainly pull Bar Harbor's numbers and maybe Portland. Portland's more of a city though environment. It'd be tough to but what it's possible, would a day work, like a weekday? I mean, I don't know that you'd need to do Thursday and Saturday. One of the things we found out was the data was incredibly similar between the 2 days. There were differences with employees, obviously. The Thursday was the day that we focused on. So we could do a weekday, and maybe that's possible to do one weekday in August. I don't think we could do.
You coming down and just needing a couple of people?
Yes.
I got two.
Yeah, there you go.
You want to come down and show them exactly what you want?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I mean, I could.
I'm just not sure I understand we've already got a pilot program. We recognize the benefit of the revenue. We recognize that we have a tremendous parking challenge. I mean, if it's something that can be achieved easily in a day and y'all will be happy to have that additional data.
Additional data point.
I mean, if it's done easily and affordably, I'm just always curious, like, how much more do we need to know about the reality of our parking situation, which is pretty self-evident, but I want my colleagues to feel good about making the decision, so.
This is not an unusual, I just say it's not an unusual request. I get it all the time. We used to get it in traffic studies all the time. No matter what data set we use, they say, well, that was different. And sometimes it was, and so but in this case, I think it's going to prove more busy, but I could be wrong. It just driving around today. But, that's something, if that would satisfy to do a single data point day in August, then, it sounds like we might have a way to do it. I come up for one day.
Yes, don't make
Yes,
it.
for me, more data, this is better. If we can do it affordably, if we can do it in a relatively short time frame, I mean, let's come up with the best solution and let's have a solution that we can justify.
Yeah.
Ideally, probably try to do a Thursday, just to marry it up with the last one.
Sounds great.
Okay.
So what's the time frame and the policy procedure? How does this get enacted? Does it need to go to the whole town, or is this something that the select board can?
So this is something the select board would make a decision on. So it would be when you're ready, we would come forward with a draft program and ask for approval. And John's done the pro forma, so he gave you kind of the high level numbers, but he's got a much more detailed breakdown, and the model can be changed based on different promotions that you might want to add in.
And that may be on the, sorry, I was just gonna say, Audra, that we could do that license, when we do the license debate for the turnover, we could try to get with the registry on Camden residents parking. So we'd get some input on, if that was a promotion to have them get a discount, we'd be able to project that.
Yeah.
So that would be a good thing.
And one more thing on my front, as far as the sales tax goes, if we do implement this, let's still take a look at the sales tax and make adjustments based on that. And if the economy improves or declines, obviously we'd want to take that into those sales tax numbers as well.
Yeah, I think we can do that.
Okay, so I guess our next step will be organizing another parking survey. I'll pull sales tax data so we have the before, and then we can come back with and John also said we can pull plate information and match it up to vehicles registered in Camden, so we give a better idea of what a resident promotion would, how that would impact the financial model.
Yeah. That would be
And then we can kind of come back to you with a draft program.
Thank you. Audra, on the sales tax portion of it, I don't think that's something that we need to analyze before we make a decision about expanding paid parking. I think that just should be something that we regularly review, annually possibly, that sort of thing. Or at least in that first year, to make an analysis of how it's affecting our local downtown economy.
Yep, absolutely.
How do you make that
Well,
analysis?
quickly though, I mean, this is a whole area of study, looking at how businesses are doing, and there are many metrics that are used. And so looking at lots of data is good, but everything described here, none of that meets the standards of like sociological research or any research that is that's all happened before. So I think it's good to do what we're doing, and that sounds fine, but we should also be really careful about confounding variables and recognizing that mostly they're analyzing sales tax data all the time, and they do articles about it. The mid-coast businesses are up or down based on all these things, and they already have lots of reasons why they feel those things are the case. So, I mean, we should just be careful about equating things that might not be
Exactly.
connected.
True.
Great statisticians at the state level have already put a lot of time
Maybe
into
Amanda
that.
Rector can
Yeah.
come and
Yeah.
explain that to us.
Yeah.
Thank you, John.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, John.
That was a good discussion. Appreciate
So
All right.
John, is this what you do on holiday, like every place you go with your family?
it. Oh, that's really funny that you say that. Yes. My wife's tired of walking through parking garages and yes, definitely.
It's counting spaces again.
Maybe they go to Lubec, Maine and get away from.
We just like here. Thank you so much.